My mother and sister thought they had won after draining my $900,000 savings to escape to Hawaii. Have fun being poor, my mom emailed. Then came the frantic phone call. Whose bank accounts did we just empty? I could not stop laughing. My name is Kendra. I am 29 years old, and for my entire life I have been the family cash cow, the designated workhorse, and the scapegoat. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set hard boundaries with toxic relatives. My sister Chloe is 32, the undisputed golden child who believes the world owes her a luxury lifestyle simply because she exists. 3 hours ago, I was sitting at my kitchen island in Chicago, sipping a black coffee, when an email notification popped up on my tablet. The subject line read, Bon voyage. The sender was my mother, Brenda. I opened it and my eyes scanned the text. Kendra, by the time you read this, Chloe, Trevor, and I will be in the air on our way to Maui. We decided your little nest egg was better spent on family who actually knows how to enjoy life instead of hoarding it. You always were too selfish with your money. Consider this payback for all the years I raised you. Have fun being poor. Do not bother calling the bank because Trevor already bypassed your pathetic security questions. I did not scream, I did not cry, I did not even spill my coffee. Instead, a slow, wide smile spread across my face. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial a video call request, lit up the screen. It was Chloe. They must have just connected to the in-flight wireless internet. I tapped accept, making sure my face was a mask of perfect chilling calm. Aloha, little sister Chloe sang over the hum of the airplane engines. She was holding a flute of champagne nestled in the plush leather seat of a first-class cabin. Next to her, my mother leaned into the frame, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses. We just wanted to see the look on your face, my mother sneered. I told you, Kendra, you cannot hide things from family. From the row behind them, Trevor popped his head over the seat. Trevor is the husband of Chloe, a 34-year-old real estate bro whose entire personality is built on crypto podcasts and looking down on my working-class roots despite the fact that he has not closed a legitimate deal in 3 years. Sorry, kiddo. Trevor smirked, his face flushed with the thrill of the theft. For a forensic accountant, your cybersecurity is a joke. Mother maiden name. Your first pet. It took me 10 minutes to route the funds through a shell company and into our new offshore accounts. You are wiped out. Zero balance. Is that so, Trevor? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I leaned closer to the camera, letting them see the absolute lack of panic in my eyes. You transferred exactly $912,000. Every last dime, Chloe bragged, clinking her glass against the glass of my mother. We are going to buy a beachfront condo. You can come visit, maybe to clean it. My mother cackled a harsh grating sound that brought back 20 years of childhood trauma. Forever, I said, ignoring my sister and locking eyes with my brother-in-law through the screen. I am going to ask you a very simple question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. When you logged into my home network, did you happen to notice a secondary firewall? A small red icon in the top right corner of the server pathway. The smirk of Trevor faltered for a fraction of a second. Nice try, Kendra. There was no firewall, just a direct line to your Cayman routing number. I am smarter than you. Accept it. Okay, I whispered, taking a long, slow sip of my coffee. You have exactly 5 minutes to tell the flight attendants there is a medical emergency and ground that plane. If you land in Hawaii, your life as you know it is over. Oh, shut up, Kendra, you are just bitter, my mother snapped, rolling her eyes. You always want to ruin our fun. We are going to Hawaii, and you are going to work on Monday. Goodbye. The screen went black. They had hung up. I set the phone face down on the marble counter. My heart was not racing from fear, it was racing from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. They had taken the bait. They had swallowed the hook. The silence in my apartment was deafening, but it was the most peaceful silence I had experienced in my entire life. I walked slowly into my home office, which was my absolute sanctuary. Degrees from Howard and Northwestern hung proudly on the wall, completely ignored by my mother, who only ever praised the cosmetology certificate of Chloe. My mother said higher education was a waste of time for someone who lacked the natural charm of my sister. I sat down at my heavy oak desk and woke up my dual monitor setup. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced precision. I did not log into a standard retail bank. I did not check a personal checking account. I opened a secure encrypted browser that required a physical security key and a biometric fingerprint scan to even load the login page. The screen turned stark black with a glowing blue seal in the center reading, Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. You see, Trevor truly thought he was a tech genius. He honestly thought because he watched a few internet tutorials on masking an internet protocol address, he could outsmart a senior forensic accountant who specializes in tracking dark money for the federal government. What my family did not understand, what they refused to comprehend, because they never cared enough to ask what I actually did for a living, is that I do not just do corporate taxes. I build invisible financial traps for cartels, human traffickers, and massive shell corporations. A bright red alert was flashing in the top right corner of my Federal Command dashboard. The notification read, Unauthorized access detected, funds transferred, Destination Bank of Hawaii, routing via wire transfer. I clicked on the detailed transaction log to verify the exact numbers. There it was, plain as day. $912,000, moved directly from the fake offshore savings folder that Trevor had so proudly hacked into just hours prior. I leaned back in my leather ergonomic chair and let out a deep, genuine laugh that had been building in my chest for 20 long years. The money Trevor stole was not my hard-earned life savings. My actual savings were safely locked away in a series of untouchable municipal bonds and a quiet trust fund managed under a separate entity. The money he took was from a highly monitored federal honeypot account. It was a dummy-seized asset fund set up specifically by the Bureau to track the money laundering network of a notorious Chicago syndicate. That money belonged entirely to the United States government, and my idiotic, arrogant brother-in-law had just wired it across state lines using his own easily traceable network address, effectively committing multiple major federal felonies before he even had his breakfast. The screen beeped softly, breaking my train of thought. A secure, encrypted chat box opened on the portal. It was Agent Miller, my primary liaison at the Bureau. Kendra, we just got an automated alert. The honeypot was completely drained. Did the syndicate finally bite? I smiled widely, my fingers hovering gracefully over the keys. No, Agent Miller, I typed back swiftly. It was not the criminal syndicate. It was a domestic residential breach. I have the exact network address, the current flight number, and the final destination of the perpetrators. They are landing at Kahului Airport in Maui in exactly 5 hours. Understood, should we intercept them immediately at the baggage claim, Miller replied. I paused and stared at the blinking cursor. I thought about my mother, who had once locked me out of our house in a freezing snowstorm simply because I refused to give Chloe my paycheck so she could buy a designer handbag. I thought about Chloe, who had deliberately spilled red wine on my college graduation dress because she could not stand the attention being off her for even one day. And I thought about Trevor, who constantly made snide, microaggressive comments about how surprised he was that someone from my background was actually good at complex math. No, I typed back definitively. Let them land safely. Let them go to their expensive rental villa. Let them try to spend it on luxury items. The very moment they swipe a debit card linked to those routed federal funds, the banking system will lock them out entirely. Then you can send the local field office tactical team to breach the doors. I want them to feel exactly the kind of utter devastation they fully believed they were inflicting on me. Copy that. Kendra, federal warrants are currently being drafted. Have a very good weekend. I closed the chat window and took a deep breath. The trap was perfectly set and the countdown had officially begun now. Just 3 days prior to this morning of federal felonies, my mother hosted Sunday dinner. The house smelled intensely of baked macaroni and cheese and simmering collard greens, but the usual family chatter was absent. The atmosphere in the dining room was suffocating. Trevor was sweating profusely through his expensive designer button-down shirt. He kept checking his phone every 2 minutes, his pale face looking sick. Chloe was aggressively stabbing her fork into a piece of roasted chicken, sighing heavily and glaring at me across the table. My mother Brenda sat at the head of the table sipping wine and looking at me like a disappointment. I knew a financial ambush was coming since they only invited me when someone needed cash. I calmly cut my food and waited for the inevitable explosion. Trevor finally slammed his phone face down on the table, making the glasses rattle. He cleared his throat loudly and looked at me with a mixture of desperation and unearned arrogance. "Kendra, we need to talk about family solidarity." Trevor began, his voice shaking slightly. "My real estate investment portfolio is experiencing a liquidity crisis. The crypto market crashed and my bridge loans are being called in. If I do not come up with $900,000 by next week, the bank is going to foreclose on our house and seize the assets of my company." Chloe burst into dramatic tears on cue, burying her face in her hands. "We are going to be homeless, Kendra," she sobbed loudly, peeking through her fingers to check my reaction. "You cannot let your sister and your future nieces and nephews live on the street." I placed my fork down deliberately. I looked at Trevor and then at my sister. "Your terrible business decisions are not my responsibility," I said. "I warned you 2 years ago that taking out variable rate loans to invest in unregulated digital currency was a catastrophic idea. I drew you a chart. You told me to shut up because I was just a pencil pusher who did not understand true entrepreneurs. Now you want me to write a check for almost $1 million to cover your gambling losses. Absolutely not." The dining room erupted. My mother slammed her wine glass down, spilling red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. "How dare you speak to your brother-in-law like that?" Brenda yelled, her eyes flashing with pure rage. "He is trying to provide for this family. You are sitting on a mountain of money doing absolutely nothing with it. You have no husband and no children. You live in a fancy glass box downtown, hoarding your wealth while your own blood is suffering. It is selfish and it is disgusting." I stared at my mother, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. She had always weaponized my independence against me. "Mother, my money is not a community slush fund," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I worked 80-hour weeks for 7 years to build my career. I did not buy designer bags. I did not go on luxury vacations to Dubai like Chloe and Trevor did last year when they were supposed to be saving. I am not bailing them out." Trevor stood up from his chair, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. "You owe us," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You think you are so much better than us because you work for the government. I know you have the cash, Kendra. I saw your bank statements when I helped your mother fix her wireless router last month. You have over 900,000 sitting in offshore accounts. You are going to transfer that money to my holding company by Monday, or I swear I will make sure you are dead to this family." He was chest-heaving, leaning over the table trying to physically intimidate me. I did not flinch. I slowly stood up, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. "You snooped through my private financial documents on my personal network?" I asked, my tone completely flat, but carrying a lethal edge. Trevor smirked, thinking he had caught me in a corner. "Family does not have secrets," he fired back confidently. The sheer audacity of this mediocre man was astounding. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement with his criminal behavior. I walked slowly toward the heavy front door without looking back once. "Do not ever contact me for money again," I said over my shoulder. "If you lose your massive house, Chloe, you can move right into the damp basement of our dear mother." That was the exact moment Trevor completely decided to take matters into his own greedy hands and legally seal his fate. As I stepped out onto the chilly concrete porch, the heavy wooden door of my childhood home was yanked open behind me. My mother and Trevor had followed me outside, unwilling to let their prime target simply walk away. The streetlights illuminated the pure desperation on their faces. "Kendra, get back inside this house right now. My mother demanded, her voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. You are acting completely hysterical over a simple request for family support. You have always been so jealous of your sister, and now you are trying to punish her because she found a good husband. I stopped at the door of my car and turned around. I let out a sharp laugh that cut through the cold evening air. Jealous, I asked, stepping back toward them. Jealous of what exactly, Mother? Am I jealous of a mountain of credit card debt? Am I jealous of a man who plays 18 holes of golf every Tuesday while his fraudulent shell company burns to the ground? Or am I jealous that you spent my entire childhood treating me like a burden while treating Chloe like a princess, only for me to become the one you both come crying to when the bills are due? My mother gasped, clutching her chest in a dramatic display of fake victimhood. That is not true, you ungrateful brat, she cried. I gave you everything. You just always had a bad attitude. You are destroying this family with your greed. I looked right through her performative tears. No, Mother, I am setting a boundary. You are just calling it greed because you can no longer control me. Trevor stepped off the porch, invading my personal space again. He crossed his arms, trying to look physically imposing, but he just looked like a desperate man cornered by his own incompetence. Listen to me, Kendra, he said, adopting that infuriatingly patronizing tone he always used when speaking to me. You do not understand how real wealth works. You sit in a safe little government cubicle looking at spreadsheets. Real entrepreneurs like me take risks. Sometimes those risks require temporary liquidity. You are looking at this emotionally because you do not understand high-level business mechanics. I stared at him, taking in the sheer audacity of his white privilege complex. Trevor, you are a 34-year-old man who started a business with a $500,000 loan from your father, which you completely lost. I said, my voice steady and lethal. You then married my sister and convinced my mother to co-sign on your luxury vehicles. You have never built anything from the ground up in your entire life. Do not ever speak to me about how wealth works. I am a senior forensic accountant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I track international syndicates that move more money in 10 seconds than you will ever see in your lifetime. I understand exactly how money works. And I understand that you are running a textbook Ponzi scheme using new investor capital to pay off your old bridge loans. Trevor turned a sickly shade of white. His jaw dropped and he took a quick step backward. How did you know about the bridge loans? He stammered, his confident facade entirely crumbling. Because unlike you, I actually know how to read a financial disclosure, I replied, stepping closer to him until he was forced to look down into my eyes. I warned you years ago that your financial structures were illegal. You laughed in my face and told me to stick to doing taxes. Now you are drowning and you expect the black woman you constantly belittle to throw you $1 million life raft. It is not going to happen. You made your bed, Trevor. Now you and my sister get to sleep in it, even if that bed is on the street. My mother stepped forward, raising her hand as if she might actually try to strike me. You will regret this, Kendra, she hissed, her face twisted with pure hatred. When your sister loses her home, I will make sure everyone in our family and everyone at church knows exactly what kind of heartless person you are. You will have no one. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. Tell whoever you want, I said calmly, rolling down the window to deliver my final blow. But if either of you ever tries to access my personal networks again, or if you ever try to pressure me for money, I will personally audit every single business venture Trevor has ever touched. And I promise you, Trevor, if the federal government looks into your books, you will not just lose your house, you will lose your freedom. I rolled up the window, leaving them standing in the driveway. Trevor looked completely terrified, and my mother was shaking with fury. As I drove away, I knew they were not going to let this go. Trevor was too arrogant, and my mother was too desperate. They were going to try something incredibly stupid, and I was going to be completely ready for them. The morning after the disastrous Sunday dinner, the reality of his massive financial failures crashed down on Trevor. It was Monday, and he was sitting in the driver's seat of his leased luxury sport utility vehicle, sweating profusely in the freezing cold. His expensive mobile phone was vibrating endlessly in the center console cup holder. The screen flashed with incoming calls from aggressive debt collectors and angry private investors who were finally realizing his real estate fund was a complete sham. His bridge loans were officially in default. The main bank had officially sent a final legal notice of foreclosure for his massive suburban house. Everything I had warned him about was happening exactly as I predicted. Trevor felt a sickening wave of pure desperation wash over him. His entire identity was built on the illusion of being a wealthy and successful white male entrepreneur. He could not stomach the thought of losing his expensive cars and his country club membership. But more than anything, he could not stand the fact that a black woman from a working-class background was the one holding the power to save him and had flatly refused. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel and made a final decision. He started the engine and drove recklessly to the house of my mother. He found Brenda pacing around her living room, still fuming over my lack of respect the night before. Trevor immediately went to work manipulating her wounded pride. He poured her a cup of coffee and sat her down, playing the role of the devoted son-in-law. He told her that my refusal to help was not just selfish, but it was a direct insult to everything she had sacrificed to raise me. He twisted the narrative perfectly to suit his own agenda. He convinced her that I was mentally unstable and hoarding wealth just to watch the family suffer. Then he asked the most important question. He asked if she still kept the emergency spare key to my downtown apartment. My mother had demanded that key years ago, claiming she needed it in case of a medical emergency. I had given her a key to the front door, but what she did not know was that it only granted access to the outer foyer. Brenda hesitated for only a fraction of a second before her deep sense of entitlement took over. She walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the silver key, handing it to Trevor with a look of grim determination. She firmly told him to go get the money that rightfully belonged to their family. By Tuesday morning, I was calmly sitting at my desk inside the secure federal building in downtown Chicago. Trevor and my mother pulled into the guest parking garage of my luxury apartment building. They used the spare key to bypass the main lobby and took the service elevator up to my floor. When they opened the door and stepped inside my apartment, they were immediately struck by the quiet opulence of my home. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking sweeping view of the entire city skyline. The custom furniture and expensive original artwork lining the walls were a stark contrast to the cheap, flashy aesthetic Chloe and Trevor preferred. Seeing the undeniable physical proof of my massive financial success only fueled their bitter resentment. Trevor wasted absolutely no time standing around looking at the beautiful view. He left my mother standing in the kitchen and marched straight down the hallway toward my home office. The door was unlocked because I wanted it to be unlocked. Trevor pushed the door open and stepped into my sanctuary. He sat down heavily in my ergonomic leather chair and stared at the dual monitors resting on the heavy oak desk. His hands were visibly shaking as he reached out and moved the mouse to wake up the screens. He was sweating through his shirt again, driven by the sheer panic of his impending bankruptcy. He honestly believed that because I was his sister-in-law, I was just a basic accountant using standard retail software. His massive ego convinced him that cracking my system would be an absolute breeze. He started mumbling to himself, bragging quietly about how he was going to drain my accounts and leave me with absolutely nothing, just to teach me a harsh lesson about family loyalty. He confidently cracked his knuckles and began typing, trying to guess my passwords using the maiden name of my mother and the birth dates of family members. He was completely blind to his own ignorance. As he nervously hunched over the keyboard, frantically snooping through my digital files, he had absolutely no idea that a small high-definition security camera hidden inside the ceiling smoke detector was capturing his every single move in beautiful crystal-clear resolution. Through the lens of that hidden camera, I later watched the entire pathetic spectacle unfold. Trevor dragged his sweaty palms across his expensive designer slacks before eagerly clicking the computer mouse. He bypassed the generic moving screensaver and was immediately greeted by my main desktop view. I had intentionally left the main screen completely cluttered with boring tax spreadsheets, generic corporate policy documents, and mundane audit reports. I knew perfectly well that a man as deeply arrogant and fundamentally lazy as Trevor would never possess the patience to dig through hundreds of mundane financial documents. He needed a shiny object. He needed a massive glowing beacon to guide his greed. Right there in the dead center of the screen was a single bright yellow folder. I had specifically created and renamed it late the previous night, knowing he would eventually convince my mother to let him into the apartment. The folder was boldly titled Offshore Savings 900,000. It was the digital equivalent of placing a giant piece of cheese on an industrial mousetrap. Trevor saw the folder and his pale eyes widened so far I thought they might actually pop out of his skull. He let out a sharp gasp of excitement and leaned his face closer to the high-resolution monitor. He aggressively double-clicked the folder. A stark white password prompt appeared on the screen, blocking his access. This was the most crucial part of my psychological trap. If I made the password an incredibly complex string of random alphanumeric characters, he would have given up and thrown a violent tantrum. But I needed him to succeed. I needed his fragile ego to feel like he was the smartest person in the room. So I deliberately set the password hint to something he could easily figure out with minimal effort. The hint simply read, "First pet plus mother maiden name." I watched the security footage as Trevor frantically pulled his phone out of his pocket and called Chloe. He whispered urgently into the receiver, asking her for the name of the childhood dog of our mother. Chloe must have answered quickly because Trevor immediately typed Buster followed by Robinson. He hit the enter key hard and the folder instantly unlocked. A massive, triumphant grin spread across his flushed face. He actually pumped his fist in the air like he had just won the state lottery. He had absolutely no idea he had just opened a direct portal to a highly monitored federal seizure account. Inside the folder was a single polished document containing routing numbers, account details, and step-by-step wire transfer instructions. I had carefully formatted the document to look exactly like a private wealth management portfolio. I even added a fake logo for a prestigious bank in the Cayman Islands, just to perfectly cater to his idiotic crypto bro fantasies. Trevor did not waste a single second trying to verify the authenticity of the documents. His massive ego and his desperate immediate need for cash completely blinded him to the obvious glaring red flags. A real forensic accountant would never leave their actual life savings sitting in a clearly labeled unlocked folder right on their desktop. But Trevor only saw exactly what he desperately wanted to see. My mother slowly wandered into the home office holding a steaming cup of my expensive espresso. She looked over his shoulder and gasped loudly when she saw the account balance displayed on the screen. The hidden ceiling camera caught her exact words perfectly. She told him to take every single penny because I did not deserve to keep it after the disrespectful way I had spoken to them at dinner. Hearing my own mother enthusiastically encourage a man to steal my money was a bitter pill to swallow. It completely erased any lingering trace of guilt I might have felt. My mother stood there in my home, drinking my coffee, wearing a sweater she bought with my money, actively plotting my total financial ruin. She viewed me purely as a financial asset to be liquidated for the immediate benefit of her favored child. Trevor quickly opened a secondary internet browser window and logged directly into his own fraudulent shell company accounts. He was happily preparing to initiate the massive wire transfer. He was typing with reckless speed, completely ignorant of the fact that the routing number I provided was actually a direct pipeline to a secure server located in Washington. He was not hacking my life savings. Every single keystroke Trevor made was being permanently recorded by federal servers. He was digitally handcuffing himself and handing the key directly to the government. Trevor leaned closer to the glowing computer monitor, his pale eyes practically shining with the bright reflection of the digital screen. He carefully typed out the routing numbers he found in my dummy document into his own banking portal. He was deliberately setting up the massive wire transfer to permanently move exactly $912,000. I watched the security footage later and saw him pause for a moment. He turned his head and looked at my mother, who was still sipping my expensive espresso. He asked her if they should leave me $10,000 just so I could pay my rent for the next few months. He tried to frame himself as a generous benefactor while in the middle of a massive theft. My mother scoffed and waved her hand dismissively. She told him to take every single penny because I needed to learn a hard lesson about respecting my elders and supporting my family. That was all the validation Trevor needed. He nodded in agreement and typed in the full amount. He hovered his mouse over the final submit button. He let out a loud, arrogant chuckle and muttered about how pathetic it was that a supposedly brilliant federal accountant left her offshore accounts completely vulnerable. He bragged to my mother that the security of my system was a total joke and that he could probably teach my department a thing or two about digital encryption. The sheer scale of his delusion was almost impressive. He firmly clicked the mouse, and the screen transitioned to a processing page. A small loading circle spun in the center of the monitor. Trevor held his breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of my heavy oak desk. The computer screen suddenly flashed a very bright, vivid green. A confirmation message appeared stating the wire transfer had been successfully initiated and the funds were in transit to the holding account of his shell company. Trevor threw his hands up in the air and let out a loud, triumphant shout. He spun around in my ergonomic chair and high-fived my mother. They were actively celebrating a major federal felony right inside my own home. Trevor quickly pulled out his mobile phone and called Chloe to deliver the good news. When she answered, he proudly announced that he had just secured their financial future and completely outsmarted me in the process. He told her to pack her best swimsuits because they were taking that Hawaiian vacation they had been talking about. He happily promised her endless luxury and total relaxation, all entirely funded by my supposed arrogance. He hung up the phone and quickly moved to cover his tracks. Or at least he attempted to cover his tracks in the most amateur way possible. He closed the browser windows and emptied the digital recycle bin on my desktop. He honestly believed that simply clicking delete would completely wipe his digital footprint from a high-level government-monitored server. He did not know that the federal portal had already logged his media access control address, his internet protocol address, and the exact timestamp of the transaction. He did not know Agent Miller was already reviewing the automated alert across town. Trevor stood up from the desk and smoothed down his expensive slacks. He looked around my home office one last time with a smug expression of pure superiority. He told my mother it was time to leave before I came home for my lunch break. My mother placed her empty espresso cup carelessly on my expensive wooden coffee table. She looked around my beautiful apartment and smiled a cold, vindictive smile. She said I was finally going to experience what it felt like to struggle and beg for help. They walked out of my apartment and locked the door behind them, leaving the space exactly as they found it. They walked slowly to the service elevator, totally unaware that their lives were effectively over. They thought they were walking toward a sunny beach vacation in Maui. In reality, they had just cemented their path straight into a federal penitentiary. The wire transfer was the point of no return. By moving those funds across state lines into his personal holding company, Trevor had triggered a cascading series of automated federal alarms. The money he transferred was chemically tagged digital currency meant to trap cartel members. Now that the money was sitting in his account, every single financial move he made would be tracked by the United States government. He thought he was a genius who just pulled off the perfect heist. But as I sat at my desk at the bureau watching the transaction finalize on my monitor, I knew he had just permanently ruined his own miserable life. Less than 2 hours after leaving my apartment, my family arrived at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. They rolled out of an expensive black car service that Trevor had booked using a credit card that was undoubtedly already maxed out. They walked through the sliding glass doors of the departure terminal, acting as if they owned the entire building. Chloe was wearing a brand new designer tracksuit and pushing a mountain of matching luggage. She loudly complained to the skycap about the long lines demanding immediate priority service because they were flying first class to Maui. Trevor trailed behind her, looking incredibly smug with his chest puffed out. He kept pulling out his mobile phone to refresh his banking application just to stare at the massive $912,000 balance sitting in his holding account. He was completely intoxicated by the stolen wealth, entirely unaware that federal agents were currently documenting his every refresh. My mother Brenda walked beside them, radiating an aura of total self-righteousness. She was dressed in an overly flashy outfit she had bought specifically for this trip. In her mind, she was not a thief. She honestly believed she was simply reallocating family funds to their rightful owners. She firmly believed that giving the money to Chloe and Trevor was an act of divine justice. As they made their way toward the exclusive first-class airport lounge, my mother suddenly stopped walking. She pulled her mobile phone out of her expensive leather purse. A malicious smile crossed her face. She decided that simply taking the money was not enough. She needed to make sure I knew exactly who had taken it and why. She wanted to twist the knife. She navigated to my contact name and pressed the call button. I was still sitting at my secure desk at the Federal Bureau when my personal cell phone began vibrating next to my keyboard. I glanced at the screen and saw her name flashing. I did not answer. I simply let it ring until it went directly to my voicemail. I knew exactly what she was doing. I knew she could not resist the urge to gloat. A minute later, a notification popped up indicating I had a new audio message. I clicked play and put the phone on speaker so Agent Miller, who had just walked into my office, could hear every single word. The voice of my mother filled the quiet room, dripping with heavy condescension. "Hello, Kendra, it is your mother," she began, her tone bright and painfully fake. "I am calling you from the airport lounge. We are about to board our flight to Hawaii. I am sure you have checked your bank accounts by now and noticed a significant change. I want you to know that Trevor successfully transferred your offshore funds into his business account. Do not try to contact the police or do anything stupid. You owe us this money. You have been selfish and disrespectful for years, hoarding wealth while your sister was struggling to survive. As your mother, I made an executive decision to correct your terrible behavior. We are going to use this money to save the business of Trevor and buy a beautiful beachfront condo where family can actually gather. Maybe if you apologize and change your terrible attitude, we will let you visit us for the holidays. But until then, you need to sit alone in your empty apartment and think about how you treat the people who raised you. Have a nice weekend working." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. Agent Miller stood next to my desk with his arms crossed, staring at the phone in complete disbelief. He slowly shook his head and let out a low whistle. "Your own mother just confessed to a major federal crime on a recorded audio line and tried to frame it as a parenting lesson," he said, sounding genuinely shocked. I reached forward and clicked a button on my keyboard, officially saving the audio file to the growing federal evidence folder. "Yes, she did," I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. "She has always believed that being a mother gave her absolute immunity from consequences. She is about to learn that the federal government does not care about her maternal entitlement." Meanwhile, back at the airport, the final boarding call for their flight to Maui echoed over the loudspeaker. Chloe grabbed her designer bag and rushed toward the gate, eager to start her stolen luxury vacation. Trevor followed closely behind her, slipping his phone into his pocket with a satisfied smirk. My mother walked proudly down the jet bridge, convinced she had finally won the ultimate family power struggle. They settled into their spacious leather seats in the first-class cabin and ordered expensive champagne before the plane even pushed back from the gate. When the heavy cabin doors finally closed and the massive aircraft lifted off the runway, they cheered and clinked their glasses together. They were flying highs above the clouds, completely oblivious to the massive legal storm that was rapidly gathering on the ground right beneath them. The flight to Hawaii was a blur of complimentary champagne and arrogant laughter for my family. When the heavy wheels of the aircraft finally touched down on the sun-baked tarmac of Kahului Airport, the reality of their tropical fantasy seemed to fully materialize. They stepped off the plane into the warm, humid air, feeling absolutely invincible. Trevor immediately took charge, strutting through the bustling terminal like a Silicon Valley billionaire who just sold a massive tech startup. He completely bypassed the standard rental car counters and walked directly up to an exclusive luxury transportation desk. With a smug smile, he slammed his debit card onto the glass counter and demanded their largest, most expensive premium sport utility vehicle. The clerk handed him the keys to a brand new imported luxury vehicle, and Trevor tipped the man $100 bill just to show off for my mother. They loaded the mountain of matching designer luggage into the spacious trunk and drove towards the western coast of the island. The coastal highway offered breathtaking views of the sparkling blue Pacific Ocean, but my family was far too obsessed with themselves to appreciate the natural beauty. Chloe sat in the passenger seat holding her phone up high, actively recording a live video for her social media followers. She loudly bragged about their impromptu tropical getaway, claiming that Trevor had just closed a massive real estate deal that allowed them to upgrade their entire lifestyle. My mother sat in the back seat nodding enthusiastically and adjusting her expensive sunglasses, making sure her face was perfectly framed in the video. They were actively constructing a beautiful, flawless illusion of extreme wealth, using stolen federal funds as their foundation. 45 minutes later, they pulled through the massive iron gates of an incredibly lavish beachfront estate. The rental villa was a sprawling architectural masterpiece with a private infinity pool that seemed to seamlessly blend right into the ocean. The nightly rental rate was astronomical, but Trevor did not care. He had $912,000 burning a massive hole in his newly created offshore account. They dragged their heavy bags inside and immediately began claiming the best bedrooms. Chloe and Trevor took the primary suite with the massive oceanfront balcony, while my mother settled into a luxurious guest suite that was twice the size of my entire Chicago apartment. For the next few hours, they lived exactly the way they had always believed they truly deserved to live. They drank expensive imported wine on the patio and loudly mocked my boring corporate lifestyle. My mother laughed and said I was probably sitting at my desk eating a sad packed lunch while they were breathing fresh ocean air. Trevor leaned back in his plush lounge chair, completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance. He decided that simply sitting by a private pool was not enough to properly celebrate the greatest financial victory of his life. He wanted to do something completely unforgettable. He wanted to make a massive purchase that would permanently cement his status as a wealthy entrepreneur. Trevor pulled out his phone and began scrolling through elite concierge services on the island. He proudly announced to my mother and sister that he was going to rent a massive private yacht for the entire weekend. Not just a standard fishing boat, but a fully staffed luxury vessel complete with a private chef and a full bar. Chloe shrieked with pure delight and ran over to kiss him, praising his generosity. My mother beamed with absolute pride, telling Trevor he was the son she always wished she had. Trevor found a premium yacht charter company located at a nearby exclusive marina. He dialed the number and put the phone on speaker so the women could hear him negotiate. When the broker answered, Trevor immediately demanded their most expensive vessel. The broker politely informed him that their top-tier luxury yacht required a massive upfront deposit of $100,000 to secure the reservation for the weekend. Trevor did not even blink. He laughed loudly into the phone and told the broker that money was absolutely no object for a man of his incredible means. He told the broker to prepare the paperwork and chill the best champagne they had on board because he was heading down to the marina right now to sign the contract and swipe his card. He hung up the phone and grinned at his adoring audience. He boldly promised them an absolutely unforgettable evening filled with fine dining, dancing, and endless drinks under the beautiful starry tropical sky. The illusion of their massive wealth had reached its absolute peak. They were completely ready to conquer the island. They had no idea the federal trap was already snapping shut. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the expensive infinity pool as my family woke up to their first full day of stolen luxury. Trevor was already awake, lounging on the massive leather sofa in the living room, reviewing his banking application for the 50th time. Seeing that massive $912,000 balance gave him an adrenaline rush unlike anything he had ever experienced. He felt like an absolute king. Chloe strolled into the living room wearing a silk robe she had found in the primary suite wardrobe. She poured herself a glass of fresh tropical juice and kissed Trevor on the cheek, asking him what the grand plan was for the day. Trevor proudly reached into his designer wallet and pulled out his shiny metal debit card. He handed it to his wife with a massive, arrogant grin. He told her to take her mother down to the luxury shopping district in Wailea and buy whatever their hearts desired. He said he needed a few hours alone at the villa to handle some high-level business phone calls and finalize the massive yacht rental for that evening. Chloe squealed with delight and snatched the card from his hand. An hour later, Chloe and my mother Brenda were walking arm in arm down the pristine sidewalks of the most exclusive outdoor shopping mall on the island. They bypassed the standard tourist shops and marched directly toward the high-end designer boutiques. My mother was practically vibrating with excitement. She had spent her entire life projecting an image of wealth she never actually possessed, and now she finally had the limitless funds to back it up. They walked into a famous Italian luxury store and immediately began pulling expensive silk dresses and premium leather handbags off the racks. The sales associates swarmed them, offering sparkling water and personalized attention. Chloe loved every single second of the royal treatment. She picked out 3 different handbags that cost more than my first car and handed them to the cashier without even glancing at the price tags. When the cashier swiped the shiny metal debit card, the transaction was approved instantly. The federal freeze had not officially engaged yet because Agent Miller was purposefully letting them dig a deeper hole. Every approved swipe was adding another solid layer of irrefutable evidence to our massive wire fraud case. Chloe walked out of the boutique carrying massive shopping bags and immediately pulled out her mobile phone. She could not resist the overwhelming urge to show off her newly acquired wealth to the entire world. She opened her social media application and started a live video broadcast. Within seconds, hundreds of her followers tuned in. Chloe held the phone high, spinning around to show off the beautiful palm trees and the pristine ocean in the background. She smiled brightly into the camera and loudly announced that she and her husband were currently enjoying an impromptu luxury vacation in Maui. She held up the heavy designer shopping bags and explicitly stated that real estate investments were finally paying off in a massive way. My mother leaned into the video frame holding up her own newly purchased diamond tennis bracelet and waving at the camera. Chloe laughed loudly and told her audience that some people spend their entire lives working miserable government desk jobs just to survive, while smart people like her husband actually know how to build generational wealth. It was a direct, heavily veiled insult aimed squarely at me. I was sitting at my desk in Chicago, watching the entire live broadcast play out on my secondary monitor. Several of my cousins were actively commenting on the video, asking how Trevor suddenly made so much money when his business was actively failing just a week ago. Chloe expertly ignored those questions and instead focused on the compliments from strangers. She told her followers that she was about to head over to the marina because her amazing husband had just rented a massive private yacht for the entire weekend. She promised to go live again later that evening so everyone could see the private chef and the premium open bar. She ended the broadcast by blowing a kiss to the camera and telling her haters to stay broke. She slipped the phone back into her purse and smiled at my mother. They grabbed their expensive bags and walked confidently toward the valet stand to retrieve their luxury rental vehicle. They were heading straight to the marina to meet Trevor and finalize the yacht paperwork. They felt completely untouchable. They had absolutely no idea that the federal banking system had just quietly triggered a massive security lock on the account of Trevor, permanently freezing every single penny of the stolen money. Trevor strolled into the air-conditioned office of the elite marina, feeling like a conquering emperor. The office was decorated with rich mahogany paneling and models of massive luxury vessels. He walked directly up to the polished reception desk, where a sharply dressed charter broker was waiting with a thick stack of paperwork. Trevor leaned casually against the counter, tapping his fingers to a rhythm only he could hear. He loudly demanded to know if the staff had already loaded the premium champagne and the fresh seafood platter onto the vessel. The broker maintained a polite professional smile and assured him that the private chef was currently preparing everything exactly to his demanding specifications. Trevor nodded in approval, acting as though he was deeply accustomed to this level of extreme luxury. He launched into a completely unprompted story about his massive real estate portfolio in Chicago, trying to impress a man who routinely dealt with actual billionaires. The broker politely nodded along while sliding the heavy leather binder across the polished counter. He handed Trevor a gold-plated pen and pointed out the highlighted signature lines. He explained that the total cost for the weekend charter, including the crew premium fuel and catering, would be $120,000. A mandatory security deposit of $100,000 was required immediately to release the vessel from the dock. Trevor did not even bother to read the contract. He grabbed the gold pen and signed his name with a massive flamboyant flourish. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his shiny metal debit card, flipping it onto the counter with a loud, satisfying clack. He told the broker to run the card for the full amount and keep $1,000 as a personal tip for being so accommodating. The broker picked up the metal card and inserted it into the secure payment terminal. Trevor turned around to admire a framed photograph of a massive superyacht hanging on the wall, already imagining himself posing on the bow for his next social media profile picture. A sharp electronic beep broke the quiet atmosphere of the elegant office. The broker looked down at the terminal screen and frowned slightly. He discreetly tapped the screen a few times and tried the transaction again. Another sharp negative beep echoed through the room. The polite smile on the face of the broker tightened just a fraction of an inch. He looked up at Trevor and apologetically explained that the transaction had been declined by the issuing bank. Trevor let out a loud, dramatic sigh and rolled his eyes, acting incredibly annoyed. He confidently explained that his bank was probably just being overly cautious because he was traveling out of state and making a massive purchase. He boldly stated that when you have as much liquid capital as he does, banks tend to put annoying security holds on your accounts just to protect you. He instructed the broker to manually key in the card numbers, assuming the magnetic chip was simply malfunctioning. The broker complied, typing the numbers meticulously into the system. He pressed the submit button and waited. The screen flashed bright red. The transaction was declined a third time with a specific error code that the broker had rarely seen. "Sir," the broker said, his voice dropping its friendly customer service tone and adopting a more serious edge. "Your institution is returning a hard decline. The system says the account is currently frozen, and I must retain the card. The terminal is explicitly instructing me not to return this card to you." Trevor felt a sudden cold drop in his stomach. The smug, arrogant grin completely vanished from his pale face. He aggressively snatched the card out of the hand of the broker before the man could confiscate it. He loudly insisted that the machine of the marina was broken and completely outdated. He pulled his expensive mobile phone out of his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened his banking application. He fully expected to see his massive $912,000 balance waiting to reassure him. Instead, the screen displayed a stark white error message. The message stated that access to the mobile banking portal had been permanently revoked due to suspicious activity. At that exact moment, the glass doors of the charter office swung open. Chloe and my mother Brenda walked in, carrying their mountain of expensive designer shopping bags. Chloe was laughing loudly, completely oblivious to the tense atmosphere. She called out to Trevor, asking if their beautiful private yacht was finally ready for boarding. Trevor stood frozen at the reception desk, clutching his useless phone and his deactivated metal card. His face had drained of all color. The massive, heavy illusion of his incredible wealth was beginning to crack, and he had absolutely no idea how to stop the imminent collapse. The massive, heavy illusion of his incredible wealth was beginning to crack, and he had absolutely no idea how to stop the imminent collapse. Chloe dropped her expensive shopping bags onto the polished wooden floor of the marina office with a loud thud. She wrapped her arms around the stiff shoulders of Trevor and asked if the champagne was already on ice. Trevor swallowed hard, trying to force moisture back into his completely dry mouth. He let out a nervous, shaky laugh and told Chloe there was just a tiny administrative glitch with his primary debit card. He confidently assured her that his bank was simply being overly protective because of their sudden travel to Hawaii. My mother Brenda stepped forward, adjusting her new diamond bracelet and clicking her tongue in annoyance. She told the broker he should be embarrassed for causing such a massive inconvenience to a wealthy client. The broker simply stood there with a stone-cold expression, holding the confiscated metal debit card tightly in his hand. Trevor desperately reached into his expensive leather wallet, his fingers fumbling in pure panic. He pulled out a secondary platinum credit card linked to his failing real estate business. He practically threw it onto the counter, demanding the broker run it immediately so they could board their yacht. The broker swiped the platinum card through the terminal. The machine beeped instantly. It was another hard decline. Trevor felt the blood drain completely from his face. He quickly pulled out a third card. This one was a joint checking account he shared with Chloe. He shoved it toward the broker, his voice cracking as he ordered the man to try one more time. The broker let out a deep sigh of extreme frustration, but complied with the aggressive demand. He inserted the third card into the chip reader. The machine processed for 2 agonizing seconds before emitting the loudest, most final beep yet. The screen of the terminal flashed a bright warning color that reflected off the polished mahogany counter. The broker stared at the small digital screen for a long moment before looking back up at Trevor. "Sir, I do not know what kind of game you are playing here," the broker said, his voice tight with professional anger. "But my terminal is no longer just declining your payment methods. The system has officially locked me out of processing any transaction under your name. The exact error code displayed here states that your accounts have been permanently frozen by federal order for reasons of national security." Chloe gasped loudly, taking a sudden step back from the counter. My mother Brenda grabbed the arm of my sister, looking wildly between Trevor and the angry yacht broker. "National security," my mother demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "What on earth are you talking about? My son-in-law is a brilliant real estate investor. He just transferred nearly $1 million this morning." The broker crossed his arms over his chest and glared at them. "I do not care if he transferred $1 billion, the broker replied coldly. "According to my secure payment gateway, his financial identity has been flagged by the federal government. I am legally obligated to keep this first metal card, and I strongly suggest you leave my office before I call Marina Security to escort you off the premises." Trevor was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his designer shirt. His arrogant facade had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, terrifying panic. He grabbed his mobile phone and frantically dialed the elite customer service number on the back of his remaining useless cards. He put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear that this was just a massive misunderstanding. The phone rang once before an automated voice picked up. The robotic voice clearly stated that the account profile was currently under active federal investigation and all services had been permanently suspended. The automated system then immediately disconnected the call without offering any option to speak to a human representative. The silence in the Marina office was absolutely deafening. Chloe stared at Trevor, her eyes wide with mounting horror. She demanded to know what he had done to their money. Trevor could not speak. He could only stare blankly at his dead phone. The yacht broker pointed firmly toward the glass exit doors, telling them their luxury charter was officially canceled and demanding they leave immediately. Humiliated and completely panicked, Trevor grabbed the heavy shopping bags. He pushed open the glass doors and rushed out into the humid tropical air. They practically ran back to their expensive luxury rental vehicle in the marina parking lot. Trevor unlocked the doors with his key fob and threw the bags into the back seat. As he climbed into the driver's seat, his mobile phone buzzed with an urgent text message. It was an automated alert from the elite rental car company. The message bluntly stated that the massive security deposit for their premium sport utility vehicle had just been retroactively declined. The rental company was demanding the immediate return of the vehicle to the airport, or they would report it stolen to the local Hawaiian authorities. The walls were rapidly closing in on them from every single direction. Trevor sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the glowing screen of his mobile phone. The automated text message from the rental car company felt like a physical blow to his chest. He slowly read the message aloud to Chloe and my mother. The heavy silence that followed was completely suffocating. The tropical heat inside the parked luxury vehicle was rapidly rising, but nobody made a move to start the engine. My mother Brenda was the first person to finally snap. The warm, affectionate demeanor she had shown Trevor just an hour ago vanished entirely. She leaned forward from the back seat, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She demanded to know what he meant when he said the rental company was going to report the car stolen. Trevor stammered, sweating profusely as he tried to explain that the federal hold on his account must have triggered a retroactive cancellation of their initial security deposit. Brenda did not want to hear his technical excuses. She loudly slapped the back of his leather headrest, making him physically jump. She called him an incompetent fool. She screamed that she had compromised her relationship with her own daughter to help him secure this money, and he had somehow completely botched the entire operation in less than 24 hours. The illusion of their perfect wealthy family dynamic shattered into a million sharp pieces right there in the hot marina parking lot. Chloe immediately went on the defensive, throwing her hands up to shield her husband. She turned around and yelled right back at our mother. She told Brenda to stop acting like a victim because taking the money was originally her terrible idea. Chloe fiercely defended Trevor, claiming he was a brilliant businessman who was simply being targeted by an unfair banking system. She insisted that I must have maliciously set up some kind of temporary fraud alert on the account just to ruin their beautiful vacation out of pure spite. The idea that they had committed a massive federal crime had not even registered in her completely delusional mind. She firmly believed this was just another annoying obstacle orchestrated by her bitter younger sister. Brenda let out a loud, bitter laugh that echoed inside the stifling car. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at the face of Trevor. She completely stripped away his fragile male ego right in front of his wife. She told him he was nothing but a pathetic, complete failure who had to steal from a younger woman just to afford a fake luxury lifestyle. She yelled that if the authorities got involved and she ended up going to jail over this, she would personally testify against him and make sure he took the entire blame. Trevor gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He was trapped in a tiny, sweltering metal box, with two screaming women who were rapidly turning on him and on each other. The argument quickly escalated into a vicious, hateful screaming match. Chloe accused Brenda of always caring more about money and social status than her own children. Brenda fired back that Chloe was a spoiled, useless brat who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. They were viciously tearing each other apart over a pile of stolen money they could not even access. The massive designer shopping bags sitting in the back seat suddenly looked like absolutely worthless heavy garbage. They were sitting in a $100,000 vehicle wearing expensive imported clothes, but they did not even have enough functional currency to buy a cheap bottle of water. Trevor finally slammed his hands violently against the dashboard, demanding they both shut up immediately. He could not handle the deafening noise and the crushing pressure anymore. He told them that panicking and screaming at each other was not going to magically unlock his bank accounts. He explicitly stated that the rental car company was actively tracking the exact location of the vehicle using an internal global positioning system. If they drove the car back to the luxury villa, they risked being pulled over and humiliated by the local Hawaiian police for grand theft auto. They had absolutely no choice but to abandon the premium vehicle right there in the parking lot. Brenda looked absolutely horrified, wiping sweat from her forehead. She demanded to know how they were supposed to get back to their expensive rental house with all their heavy shopping bags. Trevor quietly admitted he did not have a single working credit card to pay for a taxi or a private rideshare service. They were completely stranded in paradise. The stark reality of their disastrous situation finally crashed down on all of them. Trevor realized there was only one person on the entire planet who could supposedly authorize the release of the frozen funds. He took a deep breath and opened his phone contacts. He told his wife and my mother that he was going to call me and aggressively force me to fix this massive mistake. Trevor practically punched the glass screen of his mobile phone as he aggressively dialed my personal number. He was sitting in the driver's seat of the stolen luxury rental vehicle, sweating heavily in the oppressive tropical Hawaiian heat. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a terrified trapped bird. The expensive air conditioning was completely turned off because he was too terrified to start the engine and trigger the global positioning system tracker. He put the phone on speaker mode so Chloe and my mother could hear him establish dominance. He desperately needed to prove to them that he was still the powerful man in charge. He needed to prove that he could easily intimidate me into submission, just like he always did at our toxic family dinners. I was sitting comfortably in my ergonomic leather chair at the Federal Bureau in downtown Chicago. The air conditioning in my office was perfectly cool and completely silent. My secondary computer monitor was displaying the live tracking data of their exact geographic coordinates in the marina parking lot. When my personal cell phone began to vibrate on my heavy oak desk, I did not answer it immediately. I let it ring 4 times to let his mounting anxiety completely boil over. Then I reached over and tapped a specific secure key on my computer keyboard to initiate an official federal audio recording. Only after the digital recording light turned a solid bright red did I finally pick up the phone. "Hello, Trevor." I answered, my voice completely flat and entirely devoid of any emotion. "Do not give me that terrible attitude," Kendra Trevor immediately shouted into the receiver. His voice was shaking violently with a pathetic mixture of intense rage and absolute terror. "You need to call your ridiculous offshore bank right this exact second and tell them to lift the fraud alert on my holding company accounts. You think you are so incredibly smart pulling a petty stunt like this, but you are just ruining a beautiful family vacation. Call them right now and authorize the immediate release of my funds." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. I let his aggressive words hang in the empty air for several long seconds. He had just officially admitted on a recorded federal line that he possessed the stolen funds and that he knew his accounts were frozen. The self-incrimination was absolutely perfect. "I am not entirely sure what you are talking about, Trevor," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly calm and professionally detached. "I have not contacted any bank today. I have been sitting at my desk working quietly since 8 o'clock this morning." "Stop lying to me, you vindictive brat, my mother!" Brenda suddenly screamed from the back seat of the sweltering car. She had leaned entirely forward so her mouth was right next to the phone microphone. "We know you did something to the accounts. The yacht broker just humiliated us and confiscated the debit card of Trevor. The car rental agency is aggressively threatening to call the local police on us. You are doing this purely out of spite, because you are incredibly jealous of your sister. Fix the situation right now before I completely disown you." "Mother, you cannot disown someone who already walked away from you," I stated coldly. "And I cannot manually fix a banking issue for an account that does not legally belong to me." Chloe snatched the phone directly out of the hands of her husband. Her voice was shrill and completely hysterical. "Kendra, you are being absolutely evil," she cried. "I have hundreds of internet followers waiting for me to go live from our private yacht tonight. You are intentionally sabotaging my wonderful life and my marriage. Trevor transferred that money legally because our family needed it much more than you do. You are sitting in an apartment alone. We have a massive family to build. Stop being a selfish monster and make the phone call immediately." I took a slow, deep breath. The sheer blinding entitlement radiating through the phone speaker was truly breathtaking. They were sitting in an illegally obtained vehicle surrounded by thousands of dollars of stolen designer merchandise, demanding that the very person they robbed help them escape the severe consequences. "Let me make sure I fully understand this specific situation," I said, articulating every single syllable with crystal clear precision for the audio recording. "You broke into my secure home. You illegally accessed my private computer network. You willingly initiated a wire transfer of $912,000 across state lines into a private holding company. And now you are aggressively demanding that I assist you in accessing those stolen funds so you can rent a luxury boat. Is that an accurate legal summary of your current demands? Yes, it is entirely accurate, Trevor yelled, grabbing the phone back from his panicked wife. Because that money rightfully belongs to this family. You owe us everything. Now pick up your phone and call the bank, or I swear I will personally make sure you lose your miserable government job. I smiled a wide, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. Trevor was so incredibly arrogant that he could not see the massive legal cliff he had just blindly sprinted over. He had freely admitted to computer fraud, wire fraud, and interstate theft on a federally recorded line. The criminal evidence package was now completely bulletproof. I am not going to call the bank, Trevor, I said softly. Why not? He screamed, his voice cracking loudly with pure desperation. Because I did not freeze your accounts, I replied. Then who did? He demanded, his breathing sounding ragged and completely erratic through the tiny speaker. Who has the authority to freeze my money? I leaned back in my chair and stared at the bright red recording light on my desk. The United States federal government, Trevor. I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet office. Specifically, the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could picture the exact look of utter confusion and dawning terror washing over his pale, sweaty face. He tried to speak, but only a choked, stuttering sound came out. You see, Trevor, I continued, casually examining my manicured fingernails. You walked into my apartment assuming I was just a basic tax accountant. You genuinely believed that because I am your younger sister-in-law, I must be incredibly careless with my personal cybersecurity. You thought you could simply guess a basic password and steal the life savings of a black woman without facing a single consequence. But you made one massive, catastrophic miscalculation. I did not leave my actual life savings in an unprotected folder sitting in the middle of my desktop. Where is your money, then? Chloe shrieked, her voice entirely panicked. If we did not take your money, then what did we just transfer? My actual money is completely safe, I stated, letting the heavy silence stretch out for a few seconds. My personal wealth is diversified across multiple heavily encrypted trust funds and municipal bonds that you could never even begin to access. I have been watching you through a high-definition hidden security camera since the exact moment you and Mother walked through my front door. I watched you sit in my ergonomic chair. I watched Mother drink my expensive espresso. And I watched you voluntarily initiate a massive wire transfer of exactly $912,000. But if that was not your money, Kendra, my mother asked, her voice trembling so violently she sounded like a completely terrified old woman. Whose account did you let Trevor drain? I smiled at the recording device. That bright yellow folder on my desktop was a designated federal honeypot Trevor. I explicitly set it up to monitor a highly dangerous money laundering network operated by a massive Chicago crime syndicate. That account was fully funded by the federal government using chemically tagged digital asset currency. It was an active criminal bait account. And you blindly swam right into the federal trap like a completely mindless, greedy fish. No, Trevor whispered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. No, that is impossible. You are making this up just to scare me. You cannot do this to me, Kendra. I did not do anything to you, Trevor, I corrected him sharply. I did not force you to break into my secure apartment. I did not force you to illegally access my private network. And I certainly did not force you to manually wire almost $1 million of government funds across state lines into your failing, fraudulent business account. You did all of those terrible things entirely on your own. I simply left the digital door unlocked and allowed your own massive unearned arrogance to completely destroy your entire life. You set us up, Chloe screamed, sobbing hysterically in the background. You deliberately trapped your own family. You are a complete psychopath. I am a senior forensic accountant, actively assisting in a federal sting operation. I replied, my tone turning absolutely icy. You are the greedy people who decided to rob your own blood relative so you could rent a luxury yacht and post bragging videos on the internet. Do not ever try to play the victim with me again, Chloe. You and Mother enthusiastically cheered him on while he committed a massive felony. I have the security footage to prove it, and I have the audio recording of Mother leaving me a voicemail practically confessing to the entire financial crime. The interior of their sweltering stolen rental vehicle must have felt like a rapidly shrinking concrete prison cell. The absolute silence that followed my devastating revelation was significantly thicker than the humid tropical air outside their closed windows. They were finally beginning to fully understand the catastrophic magnitude of their incredibly stupid actions. They had not just stolen from a family member who they wrongly thought they could easily manipulate and legally intimidate. They had directly stolen from the United States government. They had triggered a massive automated security protocol designed specifically to catch ruthless international cartels. Listen to me. Kendra Trevor desperately begged, his arrogant tone completely vanishing and instantly replaced by the pathetic whining of a completely broken man. We can easily fix this. I can call the bank and firmly tell them it was a massive mistake. I can reverse the wire transfer right now. You cannot reverse a federal wire transfer. Trevor, I said, letting a dry laugh escape my lips. Do you honestly think the United States banking system operates like a casual mobile payment application? Once you initiated that massive transfer, the money moved through the Federal Reserve settlement network. The moment those chemically tagged digital assets landed in your fraudulent holding company account, the entire system automatically locked down. The government does not simply allow suspected international criminals to press an undo button and walk away from a major felony. I am not an international criminal. Trevor screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. I am a real estate investor. I am an American citizen. You have to tell them I am just your brother-in-law. You are a domestic financial terrorist as far as the Federal Bureau of Investigation is concerned, I replied coldly. Let me break down exactly what you interrupted today, Trevor. My department has spent the last 14 months meticulously building a digital financial trap for a highly violent Chicago money laundering syndicate. We placed exactly $912,000 into an offshore routing account specifically designed to look incredibly vulnerable. We were actively waiting for a massive cartel to bite. We expected a team of highly sophisticated international hackers to breach the firewall. Instead, we got a desperate failing real estate broker from the suburbs using the maiden name of his mother-in-law as a password. You completely ruined a multi-million-dollar federal sting operation. I continued, my voice rising slightly with authoritative intensity. You stole government bait money. And you did not just keep it in Illinois. You wired it across state boundaries, and then you attempted to use it to secure a luxury yacht charter in the state of Hawaii. That constitutes interstate wire fraud. It constitutes severe computer fraud. And because you moved stolen funds into a business account, to hide the origin, it constitutes first-degree money laundering. This is pure entrapment, Trevor yelled desperately, grasping at legal terms he clearly did not understand. You left the folder on your desktop on purpose. Any decent lawyer will easily prove that you actively entrapped me. I shook my head even though he could not see me. Entrapment implies that law enforcement coerced you into committing a crime you otherwise would not have committed, I explained calmly. I did not invite you to my apartment. I did not give you my address or my keys. I did not force you to sit at my computer. I did not tell you to steal nearly $1 million. You completely orchestrated this massive theft entirely on your own free will because you are a deeply arrogant and greedy man. Leaving my front door unlocked does not give you the legal right to walk inside and rob my house. No defense attorney in the country is going to win an entrapment argument when we have crystal clear video footage of you and my mother actively celebrating the successful theft. My mother let out a loud, horrific wail in the background. It was a sound of absolute pure despair. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her thick armor of narcissism and entitlement. She realized she was caught on tape encouraging a massive federal crime. She realized her entire carefully constructed reputation in our community was about to be violently destroyed. Kendra, please, my mother begged, her voice entirely devoid of its usual arrogant command. I am your mother. You cannot let them send me to a federal prison. I am an older woman. I will not survive in a place like that. We will give you everything back. We will leave the shopping bags right here in the car. We will just go straight to the airport and fly home quietly. Just tell your federal agents to let us go. You cannot just fly home quietly, mother, I stated firmly. You are currently sitting in a stolen luxury rental vehicle. The designer clothes and diamond bracelets you purchased earlier today were bought using funds directly tied to a federal money laundering investigation. You are practically wearing government evidence. Every single thing you have touched since landing in Hawaii is completely compromised. We did not know, Chloe sobbed loudly, hitting the leather dashboard of the car. We thought it was just your personal savings account. We thought you were just being selfish. We did not know we were stealing from the federal government. Ignorance of the law is not a valid legal defense, Chloe, I replied, leaning closely into the microphone. You thought it was perfectly acceptable to destroy my financial future because you felt entitled to my hard work. You thought you could mock me from a first-class cabin and enjoy a tropical vacation funded by my misery. You thought you were completely invincible, but the absolute truth is you are just common thieves, and the federal government treats common thieves with absolute zero mercy. I listened to their ragged breathing through the speaker of the phone. Trevor finally found his voice again, but it was weak and completely devoid of its usual arrogant swagger. He tried to fall back on the only defense mechanism he had ever known, which was his blind privilege. He told me he was going to hire the best defense attorney in Chicago. He insisted that any judge would look at his clean record and see this was just a simple family dispute over an inheritance misunderstanding. He actually said the words, white-collar crime, as if it were some kind of protective shield that would automatically keep him out of a real prison cell. I let him finish his pathetic little speech before I delivered the final legal payload. Trevor, you are not dealing with a local traffic court judge? I explained, my voice perfectly measured and brutally clear. You are dealing with Title 18 of the United States Code. Let me break down exactly what your incoming indictment is going to look like. First, you have wire fraud. You used an interstate communications facility to execute a scheme to defraud. When you clicked that submit button on my computer, the routing signal bounced from a server in Illinois to a federal holding bank in New York and then directly into your fraudulent business account. That single click carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I heard a sharp gasp from Chloe, but I did not stop. I wanted them to feel the full crushing weight of the federal justice system. Second, you have bank fraud, I continued relentlessly. You used a registered financial institution to illegally park stolen government funds. But the absolute best part of your incredibly stupid plan was getting on an airplane. The moment you crossed state lines and landed in Hawaii with access to those stolen funds, you elevated this from a simple theft to a massive interstate federal offense. Every single time you refreshed your mobile banking application while sitting by your luxury infinity pool, you were transmitting stolen data across state lines. You practically gift-wrapped the jurisdictional authority and handed it directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Trevor let out a strange, high-pitched sound that sounded like a wounded animal. His breathing became incredibly rapid and shallow. He was officially hyperventilating inside the sweltering rental vehicle. I could hear the expensive leather of the driver's seat squeaking violently as he rocked back and forth in pure panic. But I was not finished. And then, we have the money laundering charges, I said, letting the words hang heavily in the air. You did not just steal the money, you actively attempted to spend it. You tried to secure a luxury yacht charter using a debit card linked to the account holding the stolen federal funds. The government legally views that as an overt act to conceal and integrate illicit funds into the legitimate financial system. And because those specific funds were chemically tagged digital assets belonging to an active cartel sting operation, the prosecuting attorney is going to argue that you intentionally interfered with a major national security investigation. Trevor dropped the phone. I heard it clatter against the hard plastic console of the car. The speakerphone was still active, but his voice sounded distant and completely hollow. He kept muttering over and over that he was going to be locked up forever. He finally realized that his country club membership and his expensive designer clothes were not going to save him. The federal justice system boasts a conviction rate of over 95%. And unlike state prison, there is absolutely no early parole in the federal system. If the judge hands him 10 years, he is going to serve every single day of those 10 years. My mother began to cry loudly again, but this time she was not crying for Trevor. She was crying for herself. Kendra. She pleaded, her voice cracking with raw terror. What about Chloe and me? We did not push the buttons on the computer. We just went shopping. We are innocent bystanders. I scoffed loudly at her incredibly selfish delusion. You are not a bystander, Mother, I corrected her sharply. You supplied the key to my apartment. You provided the password hint. You stood directly behind him and actively encouraged him to drain the account. The federal prosecutor is going to charge both you and Chloe with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. A conspiracy charge simply requires an agreement to commit a crime and one overt act in furtherance of that crime. Entering my home and spending the stolen money are your overt acts. You are all going down together as co-conspirators in a massive federal indictment. Chloe started screaming at Trevor again, telling him that he had completely ruined her life. She demanded that he call his wealthy father and beg for the money to pay back the government. Trevor just sat there weeping openly, hitting his head against the steering wheel. He finally understood that his father could not buy his way out of this disaster. The federal government does not accept restitution in exchange for dropping major felony charges. They want convictions, and they want actual prison time. I sat quietly at my desk in Chicago, listening to the complete and utter destruction of the toxic family dynamic that had tormented me for my entire life. They were finally facing the severe consequences of their own actions, and they had absolutely no one else to blame but themselves. The arrogant illusion of their superiority was entirely dead. The arrogant illusion of their superiority was entirely dead. Trevor slowly reached his trembling finger forward and tapped the red button on his mobile screen, abruptly ending the call. The silence that filled the sweltering cabin of the stolen luxury rental vehicle was absolutely deafening. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared to even look at each other. They were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the nightmare they had actively created. Trevor knew they could not stay in the marina parking lot, and he knew they absolutely could not drive the tracked vehicle. He looked at Chloe and told her to check her purse for any physical cash. After frantically digging through her expensive makeup and designer sunglasses, Chloe produced a crumpled $50 bill she had hidden for emergencies. It was the only functional currency they possessed in the entire world. They grabbed what they could carry, leaving the rest of the heavy designer shopping bags sitting in the back seat of the abandoned vehicle. They flagged down a local island taxi and rode in absolute miserable silence back to the sprawling beachfront estate. The massive luxury villa that had felt like a royal palace just a few hours ago now felt like a terrifying glass cage. The beautiful tropical sun was beginning to set over the vast Pacific Ocean, casting long, dark shadows across the pristine infinity pool. The picturesque Hawaiian paradise was rapidly turning into their ultimate prison. Trevor immediately walked into the massive gourmet kitchen and grabbed a heavy crystal bottle of imported liquor from the premium wet bar. He did not bother finding a glass. He simply twisted off the cap and drank straight from the bottle, his hands shaking so violently that amber liquid spilled down the front of his designer shirt. My mother Brenda collapsed onto the oversized white leather sofa in the center of the living room, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. She kept repeating that she was a highly respected woman in her church community and that she could not be seen in a pair of metal handcuffs. Chloe paced back and forth across the expensive hardwood floor, clutching her phone to her chest, as if waiting for a miracle notification that would magically reverse the federal wire transfer. Then they heard it. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail, echoing down the coastal highway. Trevor froze the heavy crystal bottle, stopping halfway to his mouth. Chloe stopped pacing and turned her head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The wailing sound rapidly multiplied and grew significantly louder. It was not just one siren. It was not just one. It was a massive, synchronized chorus of emergency vehicles speeding directly toward their exclusive gated community. The screeching of heavy rubber tires violently gripping the asphalt echoed through the quiet tropical evening. Trevor dropped the expensive liquor bottle. It shattered against the pristine hardwood floor, sending shards of crystal and amber liquid flying in every direction. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. Bright, flashing red and blue lights suddenly illuminated the entire front lawn of the estate, reflecting violently off the surface of the infinity pool and casting chaotic, dancing shadows across the living room walls. The heavy iron gates of the luxury villa were forced open with a loud metallic crash. Multiple dark sport utility vehicles and local police cruisers flooded the circular gravel driveway, completely blocking any possible route of escape. Heavy boots pounded rapidly against the stone steps leading up to the grand entrance. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream as she saw the dark silhouettes of heavily armed tactical officers moving rapidly past the front windows. Federal Bureau of Investigation opened the door. A massive voice boomed through a high-powered megaphone, shaking the very foundation of the house. "We have a federal warrant for the immediate arrest of Trevor. Open the door and step outside with your hands completely visible." Nobody moved. They were entirely frozen in a state of absolute shock. 5 excruciating seconds passed before the grand double doors of the luxury villa were violently breached. A heavy steel battering ram smashed through the ornate woodwork, splintering the expensive mahogany into 1,000 jagged pieces. The doors flew open, and a highly coordinated team of federal agents and local Maui police officers swarmed into the grand foyer. Bright tactical flashlights cut through the dim lighting of the living room, blinding Trevor as he stood near the kitchen island. "Get on the ground right now!" an agent screamed, pointing a heavy tactical weapon directly at the chest of my brother-in-law. "Show me your hands right now." Trevor dropped to his knees so fast they bruised against the hardwood floor. He threw his hands high into the air, sobbing like a terrified child. The commanding officer stepped through the shattered doorway, barking harsh, clear orders to his team to secure the perimeter. 2 heavily armed agents aggressively moved past Trevor and immediately flanked the white leather sofa. Brenda screamed in pure terror as an agent firmly grabbed her shoulder and ordered her to stand up. Chloe tried to run toward the patio, but a local police officer quickly intercepted her, taking her down to the ground and commanding her to stop resisting. The beautiful, pristine vacation home was now an active federal crime scene, completely swarming with law enforcement personnel. Every single warning I had calmly delivered over the phone was currently manifesting right before their terrified eyes in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. Every single warning I had calmly delivered over the phone was currently manifesting right before their terrified eyes in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. The lead federal agent stepped over the shattered remains of the mahogany front door and walked directly toward Trevor. He roughly grabbed the arms of my brother-in-law and wrenched them violently behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists echoed sharply over the chaotic shouting in the room. Trevor let out a loud, pathetic wail that sounded exactly like a wounded animal. The agent forcibly hauled him up from the hardwood floor, pushing his face roughly against the cool marble surface of the kitchen island to conduct a thorough physical search. The arrogant white real estate entrepreneur, who had spent his entire adult life looking down on my family and mocking my career, was now weeping openly with snot and tears freely running down his pale, flushed face. He kept blubbering incoherently about how he was a legitimate businessman, and how this was all a massive misunderstanding over a simple family loan. The federal agents completely ignored his pathetic crying. A female officer began loudly reading him his Miranda rights, ensuring that every single word regarding his right to remain silent was officially documented on her body camera. Across the grand living room, Chloe was actively fighting against the local police officer who had tackled her near the patio doors. She was thrashing wildly, kicking her legs and screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded that they unhand her immediately, claiming she was a highly respected social media influencer and that her husband was a multimillionaire. She yelled that they were completely ruining her brand new designer silk outfit. The officer simply applied more physical pressure to her shoulder, easily overpowering her and snapping a second pair of steel handcuffs onto her wrists. Chloe gasped in pure shock as the cold metal bit deeply into her skin. She looked down at her bound hands and suddenly realized that her internet followers were not going to magically jump through the screen to save her from a major federal felony charge. Her perfectly curated fake luxury lifestyle had instantly dissolved into a terrifying criminal nightmare. My mother, Brenda, was still sitting on the oversized white leather sofa, completely paralyzed by sheer terror. An older, stern-looking federal agent approached her holding a thick black clipboard. He firmly ordered her to stand up and place her hands behind her back. Brenda began to hyperventilate, shaking her head violently from side to side. She looked up at the towering agent with wide, terrified eyes and desperately tried to use her age and social standing as a protective shield. She pleaded with the officer, telling him she was an upstanding, active member of her community church back in Chicago, and that she had absolutely no idea where the money actually came from. When the agent reached down to grab her arm, Brenda completely lost whatever small shred of dignity she had left. She fell to her knees, begging the man to stop. She frantically ordered him to pull out his phone and call her daughter Kendra immediately. She screamed my name over and over again, insisting that I worked directly for the government and that I could easily clear up this ridiculous, massive misunderstanding. She promised the agent that if he just let her call me, I would completely explain that she was just an innocent mother caught in the crossfire. The stern federal agent paused for a brief second and looked down at her with an expression of absolute, utter disgust. He calmly informed her that they were already in direct communication with the senior forensic accountant in Chicago. He explicitly told her that I was the exact federal employee who provided them with the digital tracking data, the audio recordings, and the physical location of the stolen rental vehicle. The agent stated clearly that I was not going to save her because I was the primary witness actively assisting the federal prosecution against her. The color completely drained from the face of my mother. Her mouth fell open, but absolutely no sound came out. The absolute crushing realization that I had legally orchestrated their capture finally sank deep into her bones. She was not going to be able to gaslight her way out of a severe federal indictment. The agents hauled her to her feet and secured the heavy handcuffs around her wrists right next to her brand new expensive diamond tennis bracelet. The tactical team then marched all three of them out of the beautifully ruined luxury villa. The bright flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminated the tropical night as they were paraded down the front stone steps. Wealthy neighbors from the surrounding exclusive estates had stepped out onto their manicured lawns to actively watch the massive commotion. My family was violently shoved into the back of separate dark transport vehicles, completely humiliated and entirely stripped of their freedom. My family was violently shoved into the back of separate dark transport vehicles, completely humiliated and entirely stripped of their freedom. I sat quietly at my heavy oak desk in my secure federal office for a few more minutes, just staring at the blank computer screen. The digital tracking beacon on the map was no longer moving around the beautiful island of Maui. It was completely stationary at the local federal holding facility. I securely logged out of the government portal, removed my encrypted physical security key, and packed my laptop into my leather briefcase. The active sting operation was officially over, and my incredibly stressful work week was finally done. I walked out of the massive federal building and caught a private car service back to my luxury penthouse apartment. When I stepped inside my home, the absolute silence greeted me like an old familiar friend. There was no toxic screaming here. There was no toxic gaslighting. There was just the quiet humming of my expensive air conditioning and the beautiful sweeping view of the Chicago skyline completely illuminated against the dark night sky. I poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine and walked over to my massive living room television. I bypassed the standard cable channels and opened a streaming application specifically searching for local news affiliates broadcasting live from the Hawaiian Islands. I wanted to see the final resulting masterpiece of my meticulously laid trap. I found a major Honolulu news station that was currently running a massive breaking news segment. The bold red graphic at the bottom of the screen read Federal Raid at Exclusive Maui Estate. I took a slow sip of my wine and sat back on my plush velvet sofa. A sharply dressed field reporter was standing right outside the heavy iron gates of the luxury rental villa. The dark tropical night behind her was completely lit up by the frantic flashing red and blue lights of over a dozen emergency vehicles. The reporter looked directly into the camera and announced that a highly coordinated task force of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and local tactical police had just apprehended 3 mainland suspects involved in a massive interstate wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy. Then the news station cut away to the raw footage captured by a local freelance videographer. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my entire life. The camera perfectly zoomed in on the shattered mahogany front doors of the sprawling villa. Trevor was the very first person to be dragged out by the heavily armed agents. His expensive designer shirt was completely torn and stained with spilled liquor. His head was forcefully pushed down by an agent as he was roughly shoved into the back of a dark federal transport vehicle. He looked incredibly small, pathetic, and entirely broken. The arrogant white privilege that had shielded him for his entire life had completely evaporated under the crushing weight of a federal indictment. Next, the camera panned over to my sister Chloe. She was actively screaming at the news cameras, trying to hide her tear-stained face behind her handcuffed wrists. Her brand-new silk vacation outfit was wrinkled and covered in dirt from being tackled to the hardwood floor. The local news anchor provided a voiceover stating that the female suspects were actively wearing designer merchandise purchased directly with stolen cartel bait money. Finally, my mother Brenda was paraded down the front stone steps. This was the absolute pinnacle of her worst nightmare. She had spent decades obsessively curating a flawless public image at our community church, constantly judging other families for their minor flaws while actively hiding her own massive financial instability. Now her face was broadcast across television networks as a suspected federal co-conspirator. She looked directly into the glaring lens of the news camera with wide, terrified eyes, looking like a completely lost and helpless woman. She had always demanded absolute respect from me, but right now, she commanded absolutely zero respect from the heavily armed officers, pushing her forward. I watched her perfectly manicured hands shake violently behind her back as she was shoved into a local police cruiser. I felt absolutely no pity for any of them. I felt absolutely no guilt whatsoever. I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of profound justice. I raised my heavy crystal wine glass toward the glowing television screen, offering a silent toast to the incredible efficiency of the federal justice system. The toxic people who had aggressively drained my emotional energy for 29 years were finally locked securely inside a concrete cage of their own making. I took another incredibly long, satisfying sip of my wine, relishing the sweet, absolute taste of total victory as the news broadcast faded completely to a commercial break. The lingered in my quiet apartment throughout the weekend. I slept better that night than I had in my entire life, waking up on Saturday morning feeling completely refreshed and entirely unburdened. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family was finally lifted off my shoulders forever. I spent my morning drinking premium coffee and reading a novel completely undisturbed by the usual frantic text messages demanding my time or my money. It was not until late Sunday afternoon that the inevitable desperate attempt at contact finally occurred. My personal cell phone began to ring loudly across the kitchen island. I glanced at the bright screen and saw an unfamiliar out-of-state number with a Hawaiian area code. I knew exactly who it was and where they were calling from. I pressed the accept button and put the phone on speaker. An automated robotic voice announced that I was receiving a collect call from an inmate at the Honolulu Federal Detention Center. The automated system asked if I would accept the charges. I calmly said yes, pressing the corresponding number on my keypad. The line clicked, and the chaotic background noise of a busy holding facility filled my quiet kitchen. Kendra. Oh, thank God you answered, my mother. Brenda sobbed hysterically into the receiver. Her voice sounded incredibly weak and completely shattered. She was no longer the arrogant, demanding woman who had constantly belittled my entire existence. She was just a terrified inmate wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, completely stripped of her designer clothes and her fake social superiority. "You have to help me, Kendra," she begged, her words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "It is absolutely horrible in here. The food is disgusting, and they took away all my personal belongings, including my medication. They are treating me like a common criminal. They put me in a freezing cell with women who actually belong in prison." "You are a common criminal, mother," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and entirely devoid of any sympathy. "You conspired to commit a massive federal wire fraud, and you were caught actively spending stolen government funds. The treatment you are receiving is exactly what the justice system mandates for federal felons. You are right exactly where you actually belong." "Do not speak to me like that." My mother snapped a brief flash of her old toxic entitlement, desperately trying to surface before completely collapsing again. "I am your mother. You cannot just leave me in this concrete box to rot." Trevor was denied bail yesterday because the federal judge considers him a massive flight risk due to his stolen offshore accounts. Chloe is completely falling apart in the cell next to mine, crying until she vomits. "You have to hire a high-powered defense attorney for us right now. You have the money, Kendra. I know you have it. You have to wire funds to a premium legal team today and get us out of this nightmare." I leaned against my marble kitchen counter and let out a soft, dry laugh. The sheer audacity of her ridiculous request was truly breathtaking. "You broke into my secure home and actively attempted to steal my entire life savings," I reminded her, speaking slowly so every single word would permanently register in her mind. "You cheered while your incompetent son-in-law drained what you completely believed was my offshore account. You left me a voicemail specifically telling me to have fun being poor. And now you expect me to use my actual money to pay for your expensive criminal defense. That is never going to happen. You owe me!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking loudly, echoing in the jailhouse hallway. "I gave birth to you. I raised you. I put a roof over your head when you were a child. You owe me your absolute loyalty in a time of crisis." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated firmly, finally delivering the ultimate boundary I had rehearsed in my head for over a decade. Providing basic shelter for a child you chose to bring into the world is not a transactional debt that I am required to repay. You spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless, simply because I was not exactly like your precious golden child, Chloe. You constantly chose her comfort over my basic needs. You chose the arrogant delusions of her husband over my professional expertise. You completely destroyed our relationship years ago, mother. This current situation is just the final physical manifestation of your own toxic choices." "Please, Kendra," my mother wailed, her voice dropping back into a pathetic, desperate sob. "I will do anything. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire church congregation back home. I will make Chloe get on her knees and apologize. Just please do not abandon your family. You abandoned me the moment you walked into my home office and decided to destroy my life," I replied coldly. "I am not hiring a lawyer for you. I am not posting your bail. The only time you will ever see me again is when I walk into that federal courtroom to testify against all three of you as a primary witness for the United States government. Enjoy your new concrete home." I reached forward and firmly pressed the end call button, immediately blocking the facility phone number from my device forever. 3 weeks later, I walked through the heavy metal detectors of the Federal District Courthouse in downtown Chicago. My family had been officially transferred from the Hawaiian Detention Center back to Illinois to face their massive federal indictments. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit carrying a thick leather binder filled with the exact digital evidence that was going to permanently bury them. I was not there as a supportive family member. I was there as the star witness for the federal prosecution. The assistant United States attorney handling the case met me outside the conference room. He was a ruthless prosecutor who had absolutely zero patience for white-collar criminals. He shook my hand and told me that the defense attorneys had desperately requested a proffer session to discuss a potential plea agreement. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and walked into the sterile conference room. The sudden shift in the atmosphere was incredibly thick. Trevor sat on the far side of the long mahogany table, wearing a cheap, oversized orange prison jumpsuit. His pale skin looked sickly, and he had lost a significant amount of weight. Chloe sat next to him, her blonde hair unwashed and messy. My mother Brenda sat at the very end of the table looking down at her shackled hands. When I walked into the room, all three of them physically flinched, as if I had brought a weapon inside. They were accompanied by 3 overworked public defenders, because the federal government had successfully frozen every single one of their financial assets, leaving them completely broke and unable to hire private counsel. "Have a seat, Kendra," the federal prosecutor said, gesturing to the chair right next to him. I sat down and placed my leather binder on the table, staring directly across at the 3 people who had actively tried to ruin my life. The lead public defender cleared his throat nervously and began his pathetic opening statement. He talked about how this was all a tragic family misunderstanding and how his clients were deeply remorseful for their incredibly poor judgment. He asked the prosecutor to consider dropping the massive money laundering and federal wire fraud charges in exchange for a simple guilty plea to a lesser misdemeanor charge of unauthorized computer access. He claimed no actual financial harm had been done. The federal prosecutor literally laughed out loud. He leaned across the table and looked directly at Trevor. He explicitly stated that the United States government does not offer misdemeanor plea deals to individuals who actively interfere with international cartel sting operations. The prosecutor opened his own file and began reading the undeniable mountain of evidence. He listed the recorded digital network addresses, the video footage from my hidden ceiling camera, and the highly incriminating audio voicemail my mother had left me from the airport lounge. He told them that if they took this case to a jury trial, they would absolutely lose, and he would personally ask the federal judge to impose the maximum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary for every single defendant. Chloe began to cry silently, large tears rolling down her pale face and dropping onto the collar of her orange jumpsuit. Trevor kept his eyes firmly locked on the table, completely unable to look me in the eye. He finally realized that his immense arrogance had led him into an inescapable concrete trap. The prosecutor then turned his attention to my mother. He told Brenda that her specific role as an active co-conspirator carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years. My mother let out a sharp gasp and grabbed the arm of her public defender, begging him to do something. The public defender simply shook his head, looking completely defeated. They had absolutely zero leverage to negotiate. The prosecutor then turned to me and officially asked if the primary government witness had any specific statement to make regarding a potential plea resolution. I opened my leather binder and looked directly at my mother. I told them that I was fully prepared to take the witness stand and testify under oath about every single toxic action they had committed. I told them I would gladly play the security footage for a jury and let 12 strangers watch them celebrate the massive theft. I let the absolute certainty of my words sink into the quiet room. Then I offered them a single, extremely harsh alternative. I told the prosecutor I was willing to formally recommend a significantly reduced sentence for my mother and my sister, but it came with a highly specific ironclad condition. I pulled a meticulously drafted legal contract from my binder and slid it slowly across the polished mahogany table directly toward them, demanding their absolute and unconditional surrender today. The thick legal document slid across the polished mahogany table and stopped in front of the lead public defender. The attorney picked up the pages and read the terms silently. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the dense legal paragraphs. He slowly placed the document down and pushed it toward my mother and my sister. Brenda stared at the paper as if it were a highly venomous snake preparing to strike her. Chloe nervously bit her lower lip and looked at the prosecutor. I folded my hands on the table and leaned forward to clearly explain the exact terms of their absolute surrender. I told them this contract was a binding, non-negotiable legal agreement. In exchange for my official recommendation of leniency to the federal judge, they were going to permanently sign away every single right they held to the estate of my late father. This included the massive suburban childhood home they valued so highly and the remaining family trust funds they constantly used to fund their fake luxury lifestyle. Furthermore, they were agreeing to a permanent legally binding no-contact order. They would never be allowed to call me, send me a message, or approach me for the rest of their natural lives. If they signed the document today, I would advise the Assistant United States Attorney to drop the conspiracy charges against my mother and sister. I would strongly recommend they serve a strict 5-year federal probation instead of spending a decade inside a maximum security concrete prison cell. My mother let out a loud, dramatic gasp of absolute relief. She reached out with her trembling, shackled hands and desperately grabbed the heavy gold pen resting on the table. She did not even bother reading the intricate legal language detailing the complete forfeiture of her precious house. She only cared about saving her own skin from a federal penitentiary. She signed her name with frantic strokes, completely abandoning the suburban estate she had spent her life bragging about to her wealthy church friends. Her entire social identity was officially gone in a matter of seconds. Chloe reached for the pen next, but Trevor suddenly slammed his cuffed hands onto the hard table. He looked directly at me with wild, incredibly desperate eyes. He demanded to know his specific part of the plea deal. He aggressively asked how many years of probation he would get if he signed the document. I looked at my arrogant white brother-in-law and let out a soft, cold laugh that echoed through the sterile conference room. I looked him dead in the eye and told him there was absolutely no leniency deal for him. I told him he was the principal architect of the massive federal wire fraud and the primary target of the money laundering investigation. I explained that the generous leniency agreement was designed to keep my aging mother and my sister out of a federal prison facility. I stated clearly that Trevor was going to serve severe hard time, and there was absolutely nothing he could sign to stop the federal government from completely destroying his life. Trevor turned pale and looked at his wife, expecting her to fiercely defend him, just like she always did. He begged Chloe not to sign the document. He pleaded with her to stand by her husband and take the case to a jury trial so they could fight the massive federal charges together. Chloe held the heavy gold pen in her shaking hand and looked at the terrified, desperate man sitting next to her. The absolute illusion of their perfect, wealthy marriage completely shattered right there in the federal courthouse. Chloe looked back at the cold, hard reality of the massive prison sentence actively hanging over her head. She did not hesitate at all. She firmly pressed the pen to the paper and signed her full name, completely abandoning her husband to the full, devastating wrath of the federal justice system, just to save herself. Trevor began to openly sob, hitting his forehead heavily against the thick mahogany table. He finally realized that his beautiful wife only loved him when he was successfully providing a fake luxury lifestyle. The moment the stolen money disappeared and the federal agents arrived, she completely threw him to the wolves without a second thought. The lead public defender collected the signed documents and handed them respectfully to the federal prosecutor. The prosecutor meticulously reviewed the signatures and gave me a firm nod of total approval. The legal transaction was completely finalized right then. I reached out and took my personal copy of the incredibly powerful contract, slipping it securely into my black leather binder. My toxic family members were officially stripped of their massive inheritance and permanently banished from my life forever. 2 months after that disastrous meeting in the sterile conference room, I sat quietly in the back row of a massive federal courtroom. The heavy wooden doors were closed, and the room was packed with federal prosecutors and court reporters. Trevor was standing before the judge wearing his standard orange jumpsuit, looking absolutely nothing like the arrogant real estate entrepreneur he always pretended to be. The federal judge was a stern older woman who had absolutely zero patience for entitled white-collar criminals. She looked down at Trevor from her high bench and delivered an incredibly scathing reprimand that echoed loudly through the silent room. She detailed his long history of massive financial mismanagement, his fraudulent bridge loans, and his absolute utter lack of remorse when he actively decided to steal government funds. She specifically highlighted the extreme disgusting arrogance it took to use stolen federal bait money to try and charter a luxury private yacht in the state of Hawaii while his own business was violently collapsing. Trevor stood there, shaking violently, his shoulders slumped forward in complete and total defeat. He tried to speak and offer a pathetic apology, but the judge immediately silenced him. She firmly struck her heavy wooden gavel and officially sentenced him to exactly 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He was also ordered to pay massive financial restitution that would permanently garnish any future legitimate wages he might ever earn for the rest of his natural life. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists one final time as the armed federal marshals grabbed his arms and dragged him out of the courtroom. He looked back over his shoulder, desperately searching the crowded gallery for his wife, but Chloe was nowhere to be found. She had not even bothered to show up for his final sentencing hearing, completely abandoning the man she had sworn to love the very second his bank accounts were permanently frozen. While Trevor was being formally processed into the harsh federal prison system, the fake luxury life Chloe had aggressively built was rapidly and completely disintegrating. Because she had signed away her legal rights to our family inheritance to save herself from prison, and because the federal government had permanently seized every single asset tied to the fraudulent holding company of her husband, she was left completely destitute. The Maine bank officially finalized the foreclosure on her massive suburban house just 1 week after the criminal sentencing. The beautiful, sprawling estate she had constantly used to explicitly mock my downtown apartment was violently ripped away from her in a matter of days. I watched the incredibly humiliating spectacle unfold entirely through the social media posts of her former wealthy neighbors. The local sheriff deputies arrived at her massive front door with an official court-ordered eviction notice, forcing her to immediately vacate the premises. Chloe was forced to manually drag her remaining cheap suitcases down the incredibly long, expensive driveway, while the wealthy women she used to play tennis with watched from their own manicured lawns, whispering and pointing fingers. She had absolutely no high-end sports utility vehicle to drive away in because the elite leasing company had ruthlessly repossessed it weeks ago. She had to call a cheap local taxi service to pick her up from the dirty curb. Her carefully curated internet presence completely imploded at the exact same time. The moment the national news of the federal indictments and the massive wire fraud became public knowledge, her thousands of adoring online followers aggressively turned against her. Her comment sections were completely flooded with angry, vicious messages, calling her a massive fraud, a pathetic thief, and a terrible criminal. The luxury brand sponsors who previously paid her thousands of dollars for online endorsements immediately terminated their lucrative contracts and publicly distanced their companies from her toxic, radioactive image. She frantically tried to post a tearful apology video, begging her audience for sympathy and immediate financial donations. But the internet was absolutely merciless. They relentlessly mocked her fake tears and her sudden dramatic fall from grace. Within 3 days, she was forced to permanently delete every single one of her social media accounts, entirely erasing the only public identity she actually cared about. With absolutely no money, no credit, and a severe federal conspiracy charge permanently attached to her public criminal record, Chloe could not even secure a basic lease for a standard apartment. She was officially forced to move into a tiny, run-down rental unit in a highly dangerous neighborhood on the far outer edge of the city. She had to immediately take a minimum wage job working the overnight shift at a massive retail fulfillment center just to afford basic daily groceries. The soft, delicate hands she used to proudly display in expensive nail salon videos were now constantly covered in painful blisters from taping and packing heavy cardboard boxes. My mother, Brenda, was forced to move into the exact same tiny, cramped apartment because she had also signed away her beautiful home to avoid going to federal prison. The two toxic women who had spent my entire life viciously tearing each other down and aggressively uniting only to attack me were now permanently trapped together in absolute poverty. They were forced to stare at each other every single day in a tiny, filthy living room, constantly blaming one another for the massive, catastrophic destruction of their fake, perfect lives. While they were suffocating in that cramped, filthy apartment, my career was aggressively launching into an entirely new professional stratosphere. The massive federal cartel sting operation was considered an unprecedented historic success for the department. Because I had flawlessly managed the digital tracking trap and handed the prosecutors an airtight federal case, my expertise became absolutely legendary in the financial sector. I was no longer just a senior forensic accountant for the government. A massive global accounting and corporate consulting firm actively recruited me aggressively, offering me a highly coveted position as a senior partner in their elite forensic auditing division. I accepted the incredible offer and walked away from the public sector with a massive multi-million-dollar signing bonus and a highly secure corner office located in the most prestigious skyscraper in downtown Chicago. I was now commanding an entire army of brilliant financial analysts actively dismantling corporate fraud on a global scale. The incredible irony of the entire situation was truly poetic. My mother and sister had actively destroyed their entire lives trying to steal a fake federal bank account because they fundamentally believed I was selfishly hoarding wealth. But the incredible truth was that my actual legitimate investment portfolio had quietly tripled during the exact same year they completely lost everything. I did not need to flaunt my money on live internet broadcasts or lease expensive cars I could not actually afford just to impress complete strangers. I used my substantial new executive income to purchase a breathtaking ultra-luxury penthouse suite completely in cash. It was located on the very top floor of a highly secure residential building overlooking the beautiful deep blue water of Lake Michigan. I had a private biometric elevator, a dedicated personal concierge, and an impenetrable fortress of real generational wealth that nobody in my toxic family could ever touch. The legally binding no-contact contract I forced them to sign in the federal courthouse was without a doubt the greatest investment I ever made in my entire life. For the very first time in 29 years, my personal phone did not constantly ring with manufactured toxic emergencies. There were no more suffocating, agonizing Sunday dinners filled with passive-aggressive insults about my appearance or my career choices. There were no more manipulative, screaming demands for emergency cash to cover the gross, staggering incompetence of an arrogant man. If Chloe or my mother even attempted to dial my phone number or send a written letter, they would immediately violate the strict terms of their federal probation and be sent directly to a maximum security prison. The United States government was actively enforcing my personal boundaries for me. I was entirely free from their suffocating emotional gravity, and the profound absolute silence of my daily life was incredibly intoxicating. During the winter holidays, when I usually would have been trapped in the miserable suburban house of my mother listening to Trevor brag about his fake business, I instead flew private to the Swiss Alps. I skied on pristine private mountains and drank expensive hot cocoa by massive stone fireplaces, completely unbothered by the chaotic, miserable reality they were actively living. They were entirely erased from my existence. On the exact one-year anniversary of the disastrous Hawaiian federal raid, I walked into the massive gourmet kitchen of my new Chicago penthouse. The sun was slowly setting over the glittering city skyline, casting a beautiful, warm golden light across my custom imported marble countertops. I reached into my premium climate controlled wine cellar and pulled out a rare vintage bottle of imported French champagne. It was a specific bottle that cost significantly more than the cheap, flashy designer handbags Chloe used to aggressively flaunt in my face. I smoothly popped the heavy cork, letting the crisp, satisfying sound echo through my completely empty, peaceful home. I poured the bubbling golden liquid into a heavy crystal flute and walked slowly out onto my expansive private glass terrace. The cold evening wind whipped gently through my hair as I looked down at the millions of city lights below. People were rushing through the busy streets, completely unaware of the quiet, absolute victory I had achieved. I thought about Trevor sitting in his tiny concrete federal cell, wearing his faded orange jumpsuit, while his youth and his arrogant pride slowly rotted away behind thick steel bars. I thought about my mother and sister, furiously boxing cheap retail items in a dusty warehouse, completely erased from the wealthy society they once worshipped, with their blistered hands aching from manual labor. I raised my crystal glass high into the cool evening air, holding it perfectly steady. I offered a quiet, sincere toast to the incredible power of absolute competence and the brutal, flawless efficiency of karma. I drank to my beautiful, massive wealth. I drank to my brilliant, unstoppable career as a partner. But most importantly, I drank to the absolute permanent peace of finally severing every single toxic tie forever. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive champagne, feeling entirely invincible. The nightmare was permanently over, and my real beautiful life had finally begun. The harrowing journey of Kendra serves as a brilliant masterclass in the absolute necessity of establishing impenetrable boundaries, even with your own blood relatives. Society frequently peddles the dangerous myth that family loyalty must be unconditional, demanding endless forgiveness and massive financial sacrifice, completely regardless of the toxic behavior involved. However, this story brutally dismantles that harmful narrative, clearly illustrating the devastating cost of enabling unearned entitlement. Trevor, Chloe, and Brenda operated under the supreme delusion that familial ties granted them a permanent all-access pass to the hard-earned success of Kendra. Their constant weaponization of guilt and gaslighting is a textbook tactic used by emotional abusers to entirely drain their targets. The ultimate victory of Kendra was not merely in flawlessly outsmarting their criminal greed, but in her unwavering, ironclad refusal to be the sacrificial lamb for their fake luxury lifestyle. She correctly recognized that genuine peace requires aggressively excising the deep infection of manipulation completely, regardless of who is actively inflicting it. The profound lesson here is that actively protecting your peace, your financial assets, and your psychological health is never an act of selfishness. It is a vital act of essential self-preservation. When toxic individuals repeatedly demonstrate that they view you purely as a disposable resource, to be ruthlessly exploited, you morally owe them absolutely nothing. The meticulously executed federal trap and the resulting permanent no-contact contract represent the ultimate enforcement of a personal boundary. Kendra definitively proved that the highest possible form of true wealth is a daily life completely free from manufactured chaos and endless emotional extortion. Stop sacrificing your mental and financial well-being to appease toxic relatives and start actively enforcing the ironclad boundaries required to secure your personal peace today.